I don't know if you've been paying attention to the saga involving Reverend Raphael Warnock and all the hypocritical white evangelical alleged Christians led by his opponent, GOP Senator Kelly Loeffler, in the Georgia Senate runoff campaign. But it feels to me like deja vu all over again. And it feels that way because Loeffler is doing to Warnock what the GOP did to Reverend Jeremiah Wright in the 2008 presidential campaign between Barack Obama and John McCain. You remember what happened, y'all. The GOP were looking for anything to smear Obama with to discredit him as anti-American. So they came up with clips from a sermon preached by Obama's longtime pastor, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, in which he says in colorful language that God will curse America. Now, of course, they conveniently left out that he followed up that comment with, for killing innocent people. That's why God would curse America for treating her citizens as less than human, for trying to act like she, America, is God and she, America, is supreme. And he said that this comes straight from the Bible. And it does. There are plenty of scriptures that support Reverend Wright's interpretation and not white evangelicals. And I can't think of a more fitting one than what is found in, ironically, the book of Jeremiah, chapter 22, verses 3-5, which roughly says basically that if the king or ruler will be fair-minded and just, if he would do what's right, if he would help those who have been robbed, if he'd rescue them from their oppressors, if he'd quit their evil deeds and not mistreat foreigners, orphans, and widows, to stop murdering the innocent, then the kingdom will be blessed by God. But if the king continues to do evil by its people, then God will destroy the city, turn it into rubble. Interestingly enough, if you keep reading down to verses 13-23, you'll actually read the example of such a king who built his fabulous palace with forced labor, who was greedy and dishonest, and who murdered the innocent and oppressed the poor. And he was described as reigning ruthlessly, was cursed by God to ultimately be destroyed by his greed, shunned by the people he oppressed, and buried in shame like a dead donkey tossed outside the city's gates. I'm not making that up. It really is in there. And if the next leader continued those practices and the people went along with it, then God would just destroy the whole city. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like God damning a nation that does not do right by the least of its people to me. And ironically, white evangelicals preach practically the exact same thing from their pulpits across the country, but about how God is going to punish America for taking prayer out of schools, for allowing gay marriage, and for legalizing abortion. But the GOP and all their allegedly religious sycophants conveniently dismissed that truth that's actually in the Bible as they lodged this hateful and honestly racist attack against Reverend Wright that I have to say, Barack Obama completely capitulated to, and Obama owes Reverend Wright an enormous apology for abandoning that man in the shameful way that he and his wife did. But I digress, because you know how I get when I'm talking about Obama. So it's in this same hateful and dishonest pseudo-Christian vein that Kelly Loeffler's campaign has taken a segment out of one of Reverend Raphael Warnock's past sermons out of context and is using it against him to paint him as un-American. Now, the clip shows Warnock saying, America, nobody can serve God and the military. You can't serve God and money. You cannot serve God and mammon. At the same time, America, choose ye this day who you will serve. Now, this is directly out of Matthew 6:24, which is not only an admonition to believers that our allegiance can be to nothing before servants to God, but these are also the words of Jesus Christ. How are you going to be a Christian and argue against what Christ himself said? But somehow the white evangelical political class pulls it off again, calling Warnock a radical leftist who's dangerous because he said a mean thing about the military. Because you notice they didn't say anything about his comments regarding serving money or serving mammon. They're just mad that he said believers can't serve God and the military. Not that believers can't serve in the military, but that they cannot serve the military as if it is their master over God. Yeah, they dragged out the Red Scare with him trying to tie him to Fidel Castro, who once spoke at Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, New York City in 1995, while Warnock was a youth pastor there. But really, they big mad about what he said about the military in particular, and that is important. See, Jeremiah Wright was right. If you go back and listen to or read that entire sermon, he actually walks through a complete and detailed excoriation of U.S. imperialism and warmongering. He called out regime change and rampant militarism and occupation of other people's land and condemned Americans for confusing God and the government through their support of these evil actions orchestrated by government leaders and carried out by the military. He was pointed in condemning the culture of war that the military props up and the worship of it that Americans participate in as if it were their God. And he directly, deftly compares the evils of militarism and occupation and violence committed by the U.S. and its allies in modern times to the military occupation and violence of the Roman Empire toward its colonies in biblical times. The military occupation that resulted in the Palestinian Jewish Jesus being tried in a Roman court by a Roman governor for challenging the imperialist occupation of the Roman government and challenging the oppressive religious leadership of the time. All Reverend Warnock was doing was echoing not just what Reverend Jeremiah Wright said, but also what the very scriptures of our faith is based on say about whose side we believers should be on. And really, all Reverend Wright was doing was picking up on what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said about the triple evils of U.S. militarism, poverty, and racism, all tied together in the destruction and oppression they cause. And it was all laid out in the scriptures these white evangelical Christo-fascists like Loeffler and the GOP want to pretend don't exist. See, they have to discredit these messages because the last thing they need is for the myth of American exceptionalism that has been propped up by centuries of U.S. military aggression to be dismantled by a bunch of oppressed people repeating the words of a Palestinian Jewish Messiah who was himself executed by the imperialist state for standing up for the oppressed. I wish Reverend Warnock would be as pointed and clear in his defense of these principles as I just tried to be, as I hope that I was. But see, I'm not running for a Senate seat in the Democratic Party, where they are adherents to the religion of U.S. militarism as much as the GOP are. And this is the problem with having a principled stand on these faith issues of war, militarism, racism, oppression, and politics. You may have to risk your aspirations to advance in one in order to stand up against the others. And in effect, that proves that you really cannot serve two masters. Follow Luke Mon Nation on patreon.com/LukeMonNation for lots of great content.